And the other thing to keep in mind too is that, yeah, there are men who are just gaming the system, as you point out. I think in prison that happens a lot because they'd rather be in a women's prison than a men's prison. But also in general, like there are different categories of people who transition, and we kind of talk about them like they're all the same, but they're not. And you can kind of break it down by age. Like there's the very young children, a 5-year-old, and we hear that, oh, my 5-year-old is trans. That's 1,000% the parent just deciding they're going to do that to the child, because no child even knows what that is. So you have to suggest that to them. Then you have the adolescent girls, and Abigail Schreier's written about this in her great book. And that's the social contagion. They pick it up from society. But then there's the older men who are adults and decide one day that they're women. And for so many of them, this is a fetish. I mean, this is like the thing we're not allowed to say or acknowledge, but it's totally true. That for most of these older men who decide that I'm a woman, it's a fetish. It's autogynephilia. They're enchanted by the idea of themselves as women, and so now we have to participate in your fetish. Like you get off on the idea of being seen as a woman, and I have to be a participant in that. It's really degrading and to all of us, that we're all being forced into this.
Well, it's always been a psychological condition. It's always been known as being like a psychiatric condition, like it's a mental health issue.
Right.
And now it's being accepted as a gender identity issue, where it was always just like a weird kink that people had. And now you're again, regardless of whether or not this person's a sex offender, registered sex offender, repeated sex offender, you have to accept this. Otherwise, you're a bigot. It's just this rigid adherence to ideology is so cult-like. It's so fucking Handmaid's Tale. It's so wild that people are just wholesale adopting this. And this is not to deny that there's people that are trans. I've met people that are trans. It exists in nature. I mean, guys will shoot a buck and they'll find out that it's actually a female with antlers. Nature's weird, right? I think nature does make humans, for whatever reason, that really feel like they should have been born a female or should have been born a male. But that's not all of what's happening. And in our desire to be compassionate and to have care for these people and to love these people and respect these people, we're opening the door to all this chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you highlight so well in this film. And it's so strange to me how so many people on the left, people that before this, I generally respected their opinion, just buy into it wholesale and will spout out things as if they're facts about how much this helps people and keeps people from killing themselves and helps kids. But it's not true.
Yeah, it's not true. And the suicide stuff is it's just so sinister because this is the emotional blackmail that they tell parents that your daughter identifies as your son now, and then the now classic line is, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son? Like, you have to affirm this or your daughter's going to kill himself. And so many parents, especially you go back a couple of years when this conversation wasn't being had at a very visible level, they don't know what to do. They're panicked, and they've just been told by a mental health provider who they trust that if they don't go along with their child's delusion, that their child's going to commit suicide. So I can understand when you're told that you're going to kind of panic, but it's not true. The evidence, in fact, tells us the opposite, that suicidality, we cover this in the film, Scott Nugent mentions it, that the only reliable long-term study we have on this shows that suicidality is the highest years after transition. That's the highest point for suicidality among trans people. But the other problem too is that there are a couple of maybe reliable long-term studies, but there aren't that many because we haven't done this to people on this scale ever before in human history. So the current crop of especially trans, quote-unquote trans kids, they're the guinea pigs. We're experimenting on them. And they're making a lot of, the healthcare providers are making a lot of promises about how this is going to turn out when they can't possibly know this because we've never done it before.
Well, that's one of the more sinister aspects of it for me is the way they're encouraging hormone blockers and hormone transition for people that are going through puberty or haven't gone through puberty. We don't have any long-term studies on this, and now they're finding that these hormone blockers aren't innocuous and that they cause a lot of health problems. and they're saying this now out in the open when people have been for years, the last few years, promoting this as if it's a pause button.
And it's just absurd because that's not how human biology works.
No.
I think there's a lot of what they claim. Intuitively it doesn't make any sense. It defies common sense, even before you look at the data. And then you look at the data and you realize that it doesn't make any sense. But even before that, you can't. What's being claimed that you can kind of put a child in a state of suspended animation where they're kind of lingering on pause. That's not how the human body works. What you can do is try to suppress the human body's normal natural functions. But when you do that, it's a trade-off. There are consequences. There are always consequences. That's how nature works. And we also know that what are the drugs they use? Like Lupron is a drug they use as a puberty blocker. And it's just a fact that this drug, number one, to begin with, is a cancer drug, originally for older men who have prostate cancer. And they've also used it to chemically castrate sex offenders. I think in Georgia they've used it for that purpose. So it's an actual chemical castration drug used off-label for, 10-year-old or 11-year-old, 12-year-old kids.
With no long-term data.
Right.
And
because there can't be.
They're promoting it as this is the silver bullet. This is going to fix you.
Right.
This is the thing that's going to fix all your ails.
And the other thing they do is they say that, well, we don't, as this conversation has grown about actual surgery for children, which is happening all across the country, but what they always say is that, well, that's not, that's not really what's happening, especially younger kids. It's puberty blockers, not surgery. And yeah, it might be true that they're not performing actual surgeries on 12-year-olds at this point. At least that's not a common practice. But what they don't tell you is that once you put the kid on this conveyor belt, they're going to probably stay on it all the way to the surgery. You've put them in the system. You've put them on. It is like a conveyor belt system, and they're most likely not going to jump off. You start with the puberty blockers. In almost every case, it's going to lead to hormone therapy, and then in a great many cases, they go from there to surgery. And the other thing too is that as they're going along with these drugs, you are taking away, you're sterilizing them. You're oftentimes permanently taking away their future fertility. So, you've taken away their capacity to, like a girl, you've made it so she'll never be able to have kids in the future. You've already taken that from her. She has given it up before she even could know what she's even given up. And then for her, it's kind of a logical process. Well, I've already given that up, so I might as well go get the double mastectomy, and then all down the line.
And then there's the euphoria that comes with taking testosterone that happens to them. Like almost immediately they have a different feeling and they go, oh, this is how I should have been all along. Now the medicine is helping me.